You have 48 hours to get that filthy truck out of my neighborhood, or I will make sure you regret ever moving here." That was the first thing Lenora Pike said to me while standing in the middle of my driveway, one hand planted on her hip and the other pointing at my old work truck like it had personally insulted her family. Half the street was watching from porches and kitchen windows, and Lenora loved every second of it because she believed public humiliation was just leadership with better lighting. My name is Caleb Mercer. I was 41 years old at the time, and the truck she was threatening was a faded dark green Ram 2500 with a dented tailgate, a steel tool rack, and enough dried mud around the wheel wells to qualify as geological history. It was not pretty, but it was paid for, mechanically sound, legally parked in my driveway, and responsible for putting food on my table for more than a decade. Lenora stared at it with open disgust, then looked me up and down, from my scuffed boots to the sweat marks on my shirt, as if she had discovered a raccoon wearing human clothes. "This thing is destroying the image of Cedar Hollow," she said loudly, making sure the neighbors could hear. "Families here have invested serious money, and people like you cannot be allowed to drag down our standards." I remember feeling something cold settle in my chest. Not anger exactly, more like the moment before a storm when every sound becomes sharper. I had heard that tone before from officers who mistook volume for authority, from contractors who tried to cheat my crews, from men overseas who believed patience meant weakness. So I smiled, leaned against the hood, and said, "You might want to be careful with that phrase, Lenora. People like me tend to remember it." Her sunglasses slid slightly down her nose. "Are you threatening the president of the Homeowners Association?" "No," I said. "I am giving my tenant free advice." She blinked, but only for half a second, then laughed as though I had made a joke too stupid to deserve explanation. At that point, Lenora Pike had no idea that the house she lived in belonged to me, and honestly, neither did I. That discovery would come later. What I knew that afternoon was simpler. She had chosen me as her next target, and I needed to understand why. Cedar Hollow sat about 20 miles outside Raleigh, a planned community of 94 homes built around a small lake and a line of old oak trees the developer had been smart enough not to cut down. The houses were comfortable but not mansions, mostly brick fronts, 2-car garages, clean sidewalks, and lawns that turned the same shade of exhausted brown every August. I had moved there 4 years earlier after leaving the Army Corps of Engineers and building Mercer Outdoor Works from the ground up. We handled drainage, retaining walls, irrigation, tree removal, an occasional backyard rescue after a homeowner watched 3 online videos and decided concrete was easy. I started with 1 truck, 1 borrowed trailer, and a chainsaw that stalled whenever it sensed confidence. By the time Lenora appeared in my driveway, I employed 14 people and owned 6 rental homes through a small company called Riverbend Property Group. I was not wealthy in the way Lenora understood wealth. I did not wear watches that needed insurance, and I still bought work jeans in packs of 2. But I had learned early that appearances cost money while assets made it. Most people in Cedar Hollow thought I was just the quiet drainage guy who left before sunrise and came home smelling like diesel, clay, and cut grass. I was comfortable with that. Lenora was not comfortable with anyone she could not categorize. She had moved into the neighborhood 18 months earlier in a silver Mercedes SUV, wearing a cream suit despite the July heat. And by the end of her first week she had complained about a basketball hoop, a garden flag, 2 garbage cans, and a child selling lemonade without what she called a community activity notice. She worked as a luxury home stager, which meant she spent her days arranging furniture in empty houses and telling people beige had emotional depth. Within 6 months, she ran for HOA president on a promise to protect property values from visual decline. Nobody asked what visual decline meant. They found out soon enough. The previous board had been dull, which is usually the highest compliment you can give an HOA. They collected dues, repaired the pool gate, reminded people to trim hedges, and otherwise stayed out of everyone's lives. Under Lenora, the board became a private enforcement squad. She created inspection committees, revised complaint forms, and recruited 2 loyal neighbors, Tiffany Baines and Howard Weller, who seemed thrilled to have clipboards and enemies. At first, the citations looked random. Then a pattern emerged. Devin Price, an electrician, received 3 violations for parking his service van at home. Elena Cruz, who owned a small cleaning company, was fined for the magnetic signs on her minivan. Wade Collins, a plumber with 2 daughters and a bad knee, got photographed unloading tools from his truck on a Sunday morning. Meanwhile, a dermatologist 2 streets over parked a branded medical van outside every Thursday without a single warning. A financial advisor met clients in his garage office all week. No problem. Tiffany's husband ran a real estate photography business from their house. His logo wrapped around an entire SUV. And somehow Lenore considered that tasteful entrepreneurship. The rule was not about commercial vehicles. It was about which kinds of work Lenore believed belonged in view. I understood that fully 3 weeks before the driveway confrontation, when I came home after 12 hours repairing a collapsed drainage system behind a daycare center. It had been 96 degrees. One employee nearly passed out, and I had spent most of the afternoon waist-deep in muddy water pulling roots from a crushed pipe. All I wanted was a shower and 10 quiet minutes before dinner. Lenore stepped from the sidewalk before I had even shut off the engine. "Mr. Mercer," she called, smiling with the kind of sweetness that belongs on poison labels. "We need to discuss your vehicle." She held out a yellow notice printed on official HOA letterhead. The violation cited a clause buried deep in the covenanters stating that commercial vehicles could not remain visible overnight. I glanced across the street at a pristine white SUV covered in advertising for Weller Wealth Management. "Does the rule apply to Howard too?" I asked. Lenora did not even look. "Howard operates a professional service. So do I." She tilted her head. "Landscaping is different." There it was, clean and honest. The sentence beneath all the paperwork. Landscaping is different. Work done with dirt under your nails was something to hide, while work done behind a desk deserved the tasteful logo and a tax deduction. I folded the notice and slipped it into my pocket. "You should probably put that distinction in writing," I said. Her smile vanished. The next morning, I woke at 5:45 to the sound of a camera shutter outside my bedroom window. Tiffany Baines was crouched beside my truck, taking photographs from every angle. When I opened the front door, she nearly dropped her phone. "Morning, Tiffany. Planning to buy it?" She stood quickly and brushed imaginary dust from her leggings. "I am documenting violations for the board." "At dawn?" Very committed. She hurried away without answering. By lunchtime, another citation appeared under my windshield wiper. By dinner, there was a third one taped to my garage door, along with the warning that repeated offenses could result in escalating fines, legal fees, and suspension of community privileges. The pool privilege did not concern me. The legal fees did. Not because I could not pay them, but because I recognized the strategy. Lenora was creating a paper trail, not to enforce a rule, but to make my life expensive enough that leaving would seem easier than fighting. That evening, I made coffee, opened my laptop, and started a spreadsheet. Old habits came back fast. Dates, times, vehicle descriptions, photographs, witness names, copies of every notice. I drove every street in Cedar Hollow and documented every business vehicle parked overnight. 12 qualified under the wording of the covenant. Only 4 had received violations, and everyone belonged to a tradesperson or service worker. I photographed Howard's SUV, the medical van, Tiffany's photography vehicle, and a sedan advertising a private accounting practice. Then I checked the neighborhood social media page. Lenora had congratulated Tiffany's husband on launching his business, praised Howard for serving local families, and shared the dermatologist charity fundraiser. But when Elena Cruz posted about hiring 2 new cleaners, Lenora replied publicly, "Please remember that commercial activity must not interfere with neighborhood standards." I stared at the screen for a long time, feeling that cold stillness return. This was bigger than my truck. Lenora was deciding who deserved dignity, and the HOA had handed her a stack of rules to disguise her prejudice. I saved every screenshot, backed up the files, and called Devin Price. "You still have those violation letters?" I asked. "All 9 of them," he said. "Why?" "Because I think Lenora made a mistake." "What mistake?" She assumed we were all fighting alone. Devin was quiet for a moment. Then I heard him exhale through his nose, slow and heavy, like a man who had been carrying something alone and had just realized he could finally set part of it down. We met the next morning at a diner off Highway 64, the kind of place where the coffee was strong, the boots were cracked, and nobody cared what kind of truck you parked outside. Devin brought a folder thick with violation letters, each one more ridiculous than the last. Improper vehicle visibility, unauthorized tool storage, excessive business identification, One even cited him for leaving a ladder secured to the roof of his van for 6 hours on a Saturday. Elena Cruz arrived 10 minutes later with her own stack of notices and an expression I recognized immediately. Not fear, not exactly, but exhaustion mixed with humiliation. She had spent 16 years building her cleaning company, starting alone with a borrowed vacuum and a list of customers written on the back of grocery receipts, and now Lenora was making her feel ashamed every time she came home from work. Wade Collins showed up next, moving carefully because of his knee. Then Curtis Shaw, who repaired heating systems. And finally Naomi Bell, a mobile dog groomer whose van had been photographed 27 times in 1 month. We spread everything across the table between syrup bottles and cooling plates of eggs. And once the papers were side by side, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Every targeted resident worked with tools, equipment, uniforms, or service vehicles, while every exempt resident offered what Lenora called a professional service. Devin tapped one of the letters with his finger and said, "She told me an electrician van makes the neighborhood look temporary." Elena looked at him and gave a tired laugh. "She told me cleaning supplies suggest low-income activity." That phrase stayed with me. Low-income activity. As if work itself became offensive when Lenora could see it. I told them we were not going to fight her with shouting, threats, or angry posts online. We're going to let her keep talking, keep writing, keep exposing exactly what she believed, and we were going to document every second of it. Wade leaned back and studied me. "You sound like you have done this before." "Not with an HOA," I said, but arrogance wears the same uniform everywhere. Over the next week, my kitchen became an unofficial command center. Elena organized the citations by date. Devin compared the wording. Naomi built a list of exempt vehicles, and Wade contacted residents who had quietly paid fines because they were afraid of retaliation. We found 11 people who had been targeted, all of them blue-collar workers or small service business owners, and not one white-collar business owner had received the same treatment. The more we looked, the uglier it became. Lenora had approved a neighborhood spotlight post praising Howard Weller for meeting financial clients from his home. Yet she had fined Curtis because a customer dropped off a broken thermostat at his garage. She had allowed Tiffany's husband to park a photography trailer in the driveway during wedding season, while fining Naomi for leaving her grooming van outside overnight after the transmission failed. She called one entrepreneurship and the other commercial contamination. Then Lenore made the mistake of creating a private online group called Preserve Cedar Hollow. Tiffany invited half the neighborhood, including Devin, apparently forgetting he was one of the people they were attacking. The first post featured a close-up photograph of my truck beneath the words, "This is how decline begins." Lenore claimed visible trade vehicles could reduce every home's resale value by as much as $18,000. She offered no appraisal, no market analysis, and no explanation. Just a dramatic number large enough to frighten people. The comments filled quickly. Some residents called my truck disgusting. Some said contractors should live in industrial areas. And one man I had helped dig out after a storm wrote that people who could not respect community standards should rent somewhere else. I stared at that comment longer than I should have. I had used my own equipment to clear a fallen oak from his driveway the previous winter and never charged him a dime. That was the part that hurt more than Lenora's insults. Watching decent people become cruel because someone had given their fear a respectable name. But then Devin entered the conversation. He posted a photograph of Howard's heavily branded SUV parked outside at midnight and asked why it had never received a citation. Elena added a photo of Tiffany's business trailer. Naomi posted the dermatologist's medical van. And within an hour, residents were asking questions Lenora could not answer. She deleted some comments, removed others from the group, then posted that professional vehicles were categorically different from labor vehicles. I saved the screenshot before she could erase it. That sentence was better than anything a lawyer could have written for us. 2 days later, a woman named Marissa Cole called me from the property management firm handling my rentals. "Caleb," she said, "I reviewed the HOA documents you asked about, and there is something you need to see." Her office smelled like printer toner and peppermint tea, and she had arranged a row of old agreements across a conference table. Riverbend Property Group had purchased 6 houses directly from the original developer during a slow sales period, not one at a time as I remembered, but as part of a bulk transaction. Buried in the transfer agreement were enhanced voting rights attached to those properties. I controlled just over 11% of the total HOA vote, and any major covenant change involving parking, home business activity, or property use required written notice to bulk owners and could be challenged under a special veto provision if enforcement created an unequal burden. Marissa slid the document toward me and tapped the highlighted paragraph. Lenora cannot legally pass the commercial vehicle amendment without notifying you first. Has she? Not once. Then Marissa opened another file. There is more. While reviewing the association's public financial statements, I found payments to Pike Home Presentation Services, Lenora's company, $17,400 in consulting and community image fees over 9 months. No competitive bids, no detailed invoices, no board authorization in the meeting minutes. The room went very still. Lenora had not just turned the HOA into a weapon. She might have been using it as a personal checking account. Marissa warned me not to accuse her publicly without a formal audit, and I agreed. The goal was not revenge, no matter how satisfying revenge sounded at 2 in the morning. The goal was to stop her, expose the truth, and make sure she could never do this to another family. So I waited, and Lenora rewarded my patience by becoming more reckless. She announced an emergency community meeting for the following Thursday, calling it a final vote to protect Cedar Hollow from commercial intrusion. She printed glossy flyers, knocked on doors with Tiffany, and even contacted a local television station about covering what she described as a grassroots property rights effort. I found the flyer taped to my mailbox beneath another warning, ordering me to remove my truck within 48 hours. The irony would have been funny if the malice behind it had not been so clear. She wanted cameras there because she expected to humiliate me in public, and she wanted the neighborhood to watch a working man get pushed out as proof of her power. 3 mornings before the meeting, a county code inspector pulled into my driveway. He said someone had reported hazardous chemical storage, unlicensed commercial activity, and illegal equipment maintenance at my residence. We walked through the garage together. He found a lawnmower, hand tools, 2 bags of grass seed, and an unopened container of driveway salt. He looked at me, looked back at his complaint form, and shook his head. "Somebody is wasting county time," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, he mentioned that the complainant's address showed unresolved permits for a deck extension and drainage work. I asked him not to act on my behalf, but I told him he should enforce the law wherever the evidence led. That evening, Naomi sent me security footage from a camera mounted above her side gate. Lenora was visible across the street at 11:38 at night, stepping onto my property with a flashlight, circling my truck, peering through the garage windows, and lifting the lid of my mailbox. The microphone caught her whispering, "There has to be something here." My hands tightened around the phone as I watched. I had tolerated the letters, the insults, even the public attacks. But seeing her outside my home in darkness changed something in me. Home is supposed to be the one place where a man can lower his guard. Lenora had turned mine into another battlefield. I called Marissa, sent the footage, and started preparing a trespass complaint. Before I could file it, Devin called with an even bigger surprise. Lenora had approached him outside a hardware store and offered to erase every fine on his account if he stopped supporting me. When he hesitated, she warned that the board could encourage the county to take a closer look at his electrical licensing. Devin had recorded the entire conversation on his phone. I listened twice, once as a business owner and once as a former soldier, and both versions of me reached the same conclusion. Lenora was no longer defending a rule. She was using fear, selective punishment, and private favors to maintain control. The next morning, a final notice arrived by certified mail, giving me 24 hours to remove the truck or face a lien against my property. She had shortened the deadline because she sensed the neighborhood turning against her. I called Marissa and told her to prepare everything: ownership records, voting rights, financial documents, the recordings, the footage, all of it. But I still did not understand the strangest part of the story. That came late that night when I opened my rental portfolio and began matching tenant names to Cedar Hollow addresses. I had always let the management company handle leasing because I was too busy running crews and chasing permits, so most names meant nothing to me. Then I reached 2119 Laurel Crest Lane, the largest house in the neighborhood, the house with the cream curtains, the stone mailbox, and the silver Mercedes parked outside. Tenant, Lenora Pike. Monthly rent, $3,100. Lease began 22 months earlier. I read the line 3 times before the truth settled in. The woman trying to drive me out of Cedar Hollow was living in one of my houses, paying rent to my company every month, using my property as the headquarters for a campaign designed to prove that people like me did not belong there. I pulled up her lease. And there it was, in plain language. Tenants were required to follow all HOA covenanters, obtain written approval for structural changes, and avoid conduct that exposed the owner to legal liability. Lenora's unapproved deck, her drainage work, her fence extension, every violation she had hidden while punishing others, all of it placed her in breach of contract. I sat alone at my desk while rain ticked against the windows, and the glow from the screen filled the room, thinking about how close I had come to fighting this the wrong way. I could have yelled back in the driveway, threatened her, posted angry videos, given her exactly the image she wanted. But patience had uncovered something anger never would have found. By midnight, I had one folder containing the HOA documents and another containing Lenora's lease. Thursday's meeting was less than 48 hours away. The television cameras were already confirmed, and Lenora believed she was about to remove a landscaper from her neighborhood. She had no idea she was preparing to publicly attack the man who owned the house she planned to return to afterward. By Thursday evening, the rain had settled into a cold, steady drizzle, the kind that turned the community center parking lot black and glossy beneath the streetlights. And I sat in my truck for a few minutes watching people hurry inside with umbrellas tilted against the wind. Lenora arrived in her silver Mercedes wearing a navy dress, pearl earrings, and the expression of someone stepping onto a stage she believed had been built entirely for her. A local news van pulled in behind her, and she paused beneath the awning to speak with a reporter, gesturing toward the building while Tiffany stood nearby holding a stack of glossy petitions. I could not hear every word, but I caught phrases like protecting families and preserving investment, and I almost admired the performance. Almost. Marissa met me near the entrance carrying two folders. One marked HOA records and the other marked lease compliance. She looked at me and said, "Once this begins, do not interrupt her. Let her put everything on the record." The meeting room was packed. Folding chairs filled every row. People stood along the walls, and the television camera faced a small podium decorated with a fake fern that looked nervous enough to leave. Lenora opened with confidence, thanking everyone for supporting what she called a necessary stand against commercial decline. She showed photographs of my truck on a projector screen, zoomed in so tightly that the dent in the tailgate looked like structural damage to the neighborhood itself. She claimed work vehicles attracted lower-income buyers, increased noise, and created a perception of instability. Then she looked directly at me and said, "Some residents believe personal hardship places them above community standards, but no individual is more important than Cedar Hollow." I felt every eye in the room turn toward me, but I stayed seated. Devin sat 2 rows ahead, Elena beside him, Wade near the aisle with his cane resting against his knee. Lenora continued for nearly 20 minutes, growing bolder with every slide, until she finally announced that the board would vote on a permanent ban and authorize immediate liens against non-compliant homeowners. That was when Marissa stood. Her chair scraped across the floor, and the room quieted almost instantly. "Before any vote proceeds," she said, "the association must confirm that all property stakeholders received legally required notice." Lenora frowned. "Everyone received notice." "Not everyone," Marissa replied. "The original developer agreement grants enhanced rights to bulk property owners, including separate notice and review of amendments affecting parking and property use." Lenora gave a little laugh and looked toward the camera. "There are no bulk property owners in Cedar Hollow." Marissa opened the first folder. Riverbend Property Group owns 6 homes in this community and controls just over 11% of the total vote. The room changed. You could feel it, that small shift when curiosity becomes attention. Lenora looked around as though the owner might rise from some distant corner. "Who represents Riverbend?" she asked. Marissa turned toward me. "Mr. Mercer does." For the first time all evening, Lenora had no immediate response. I stood slowly and walked toward the front, my boots making dull sounds against the tile. Riverbend owns 103 Willow Bend, Y8 Meadow Run, 712 Foxglove Court, 66 Juniper Circle, 905 Brookstone Way, and 219 Laurel Crest Lane, I said. At the last address, Lenora's face changed. It was not dramatic at first, just a slight tightening around her mouth. Then the color began leaving her cheeks. "That is my address," she said. "I know." The room went silent enough to hear the rain against the windows. Lenora stared at me. "What exactly are you saying?" "I am saying you have been renting my house for 22 months. Your payments go to Riverbend Property Group on the 1st of every month. $3,100. Automatic transfer. Tiffany whispered something behind her, but Lenora did not move. You are my landlord, she said, barely loud enough for the microphone. Yes, the same landscaper you said does not belong here owns the house you go home to every night. A few people laughed, then stopped when they realized I was not joking. The reporter stepped closer, the camera light brightening Lenora's face as she gripped the podium. This changes nothing, she snapped. Ownership does not excuse violations. Actually, Marissa said, it changes the boat completely. Mr. Mercer has veto authority over amendments that create unequal burdens, and the documented enforcement pattern gives him clear grounds to exercise it. She began placing exhibits on the table, photographs of exempt vehicles, copies of selective citations, screenshots of Lenora praising white-collar businesses while threatening tradespeople. Devin played the recording of her offering to erase his fines in exchange for silence. Naomi's security footage showed Lenora entering my property at night, circling the truck, looking through the garage windows, and opening my mailbox. With every piece of evidence, the room grew quieter. Lenora's confidence drained away, replaced by anger, then panic. She pointed at us and shouted that we were conspiring against her, that people like us were destroying everything she had worked to build. Elena stood and asked, "What exactly did you build, Lenora? Besides fear?" That question landed harder than any accusation. Marissa opened the second folder and explained the unapproved deck, the altered drainage line, the fence extension, and the lease clauses Lenora had violated. She made it clear that no immediate removal would occur and that every legal notice period would be honored. But formal lease enforcement would begin the next morning. Lenora looked at me with pure disbelief. "You would evict me over a truck?" "No," I said. "I would enforce the same rules you demanded everyone else follow." Then Marissa revealed the $17,400 paid from HOA funds to Lenora's company without proper authorization. People began shouting questions. Board members demanded an audit, and Howard Weller stepped away from Lenora as though distance might erase his support. The vote on the truck ban never happened. Instead, the residents called for an emergency no-confidence vote, and Lenora was removed as president by an overwhelming majority. She stood at the podium while hands rose across the room, one after another, until even Tiffany slowly raised hers. Lenora looked around as if betrayal had a face, but what she was seeing was consequence. 6 weeks later, after proper notices and inspections, she moved out of 219 Laurel Crest Lane. The financial audit was referred to investigators. The county issued fines for the unpermitted work, and Cedar Hollow adopted a new enforcement policy requiring identical treatment for every business vehicle, whether it carried ladders, medical equipment, cameras, or financial brochures. Devin became board president. Elena joined the review committee, and the first thing they did was refund every unfair fine. My truck stayed exactly where it had always been, in my driveway, dented tailgate and all. Sometimes I still think about that night. Not because humiliating Lenora felt good, though I would be lying if I said there was no satisfaction in it, but because the whole thing taught me how quickly ordinary people can accept cruelty when it arrives dressed as protection. Lenora believed she was defending property values, but what she really valued was control. And once people stopped confusing the two, her power vanished. So tell me honestly, was I right to enforce the lease after everything she did? Or did owning her house give me too much power in the fight? Drop your answer in the comments, tell me where you are watching from, and share this story with anyone who has ever been judged by their job, their clothes, or the vehicle that pays their bills, because sometimes the person being looked down on is standing on more solid ground than anyone realizes.